We are back together on Career Lab after a little break for pretty obvious reasons. And we're not sitting across from each other, but I know that in my headset is America's Career Counselor, Julie LaCroix. How are you today, Julie?
Doing great over here in my own little solo room. Joel, how are you doing?
Doing okay in my own little solo room as well. Now, Julie, it's so great to hear your voice.
I know, it's good to hear your voice too. And we have a really interesting caller today. I'm excited to have this podcast today.
Yes, we have a colleague of mine who I know is going to be great, but I'm wondering if we could just talk for a couple of minutes about, the podcast has been off the air just for a short amount of time while everyone dealt with what's called the pandemic, and it certainly changed everybody's lives. And I know we'll be talking about it a lot. How are you doing, Julie?
Well, I'm hanging in there. I'm trying to do a lot of extra services for my clients. I'm giving them a lot of extra time. I'm doing some webinars, some resume Zoom meetings, some career counseling. Doing a big group career counseling call this weekend, Saturday morning, just trying to help kind of keep my doors open for people who need pro bono help, a little bit of direction and guidance as to how to stabilize if they're unemployed or furloughed, and kind of next steps. And then it's interesting also, I'm getting a lot of just regular clients who are actually going through interviews and getting hired right now. So it's kind of a little bit of a traffic jam. Some people are doing well and some people aren't doing as well. It's very, very interesting.
That is very interesting. And we hopefully will have more time to spend on that in our future podcasts. Well,
sure,
I'm glad to hear how you're doing, and I expected to hear that from you. I've been doing a lot of pro bono work with clients who, unfortunately, upper-end clients who have been kind of laid off from their positions at companies. So that is a problem for many people, and I know I've been seeing a lot of clients pro bono and doing some other things, and kind of like you, working with clients virtually, obviously, is the way we're all working now. And really, I know in a lot of my other professional activities, people are talking about the way the world of work will change. And I definitely think there are some things that will change in the future. And I was hoping that in a future podcast, you and I can talk about that.
I think that would be really interesting because this is one of the first times since the dawn of technology that the actual structure of work might change. The market of work always changes. The job market is sometimes very open and sometimes a little more closed off, but the structure is usually about the same. It's a pretty consistent structure, but I think we're going to have some changes this time, Joel.
I think you're right, Julie, and that's why I was hoping, at some point we'll talk about it, because all of my professional connections and my colleagues are telling me that things are really going to be different for a number of people. So I think it'll be good to talk about it. It'll be fun. And I know you and I are going to kind of put together a little program as well. And hopefully this program is going to help people who are changing in work and for whom work is changing.
Absolutely, Joel. You and I were brainstorming last week, and I got to give you some props for coming up with a great name for it and really tying the name with the purpose of what we're trying to do, helping people pivot around the workforce, given, where they're starting and where they're trying to go. So you want to talk a little bit about that, Joel?
I think we'll wait a little bit. Don't really want to give too much away, except that when Joel and Julie put together a program, you can be sure it's going to be a real program. And I'm excited to say that it will reach out to a lot of people who really need help in pivoting during this pandemic and the economy that follows it. So, whether it's a V curve, whether it's a U curve, whether it's an L curve, we're going to be there to help people. And I just wanted to share that with our listeners today.
Absolutely, because our listeners always get to be on the cutting edge of what's going on out there, because all the information that we work with when we're talking to callers is all real live content. That's what's happening today. And I think that, helping people pivot, not just today, but for the new job market after this is a huge part of why people should continue to tune into us here at Career Lab. We really want everyone to understand to the best of their abilities how to navigate their next steps. So, having that vision is always the key, but then the strategy that follows, that's where Joel and I really love to help you guys. So wouldn't you agree, Joel?
Oh, yeah. I'm so glad you said that, because here's the thing. While not every one of our listeners will be able to be in our program for whatever, logistical, geographic, whatever reasons, a lot of you will be able to benefit because we're going to bring that intel. We're going to bring those concepts. We're going to bring these ideas and good information to people who are listening to Career Lab. So stay tuned because there's going to be something that's meaningful for you coming up over the next few shows. I promise it, and Julie promises it, and Julie always delivers.
Well, that's what we do.
So, Julie, we have an amazing guest with us today who's a colleague of mine, and I know someone you wanted to meet as well. And I'd like to bring you onto the show right now. Patrick, how are you doing today?
Well, I think in a COVID world, I'm pretty good. So pretty good after about 8 weeks of being holed up in my place in downtown San Diego. Things are not too bad.
Good. Well, I want to do a little introduction of you, Patrick, so our listeners can get to know you, and we'll be able to promote this episode as well, offline and following its publishing. So you'll get a chance to get a little bounce from it. Patrick Collard is a colleague of mine, and Patrick, you are a doctoral, a PhD candidate in human resources, if I'm saying that right. Right?
Yeah, that's correct. I'm actually off semester right now, just simply because of the whole, COVID-19, and the university went to a different format. But I should be able to resume my studies in the fall. I'm about, I'm one class away from my dissertation. So.
Yeah, well, it's fantastic. And the point of that is, Patrick, you're going to be a doctor of human resources, and there aren't that many of those. And I think it's a fantastic achievement. And I know you have a company you work with, Trust HR, and I believe that's a multi-state company, isn't it, Patrick?
Well, my business partner, yes, I have an HR practice of 29 years. My business partner is actually located back in the Midwest, back in Wisconsin, where I grew up, and we do HR consulting across the U.S., as well as employment background checks across the U.S. and international.
Wow.
Yeah, I want to tell us a little more about that because I know your company is an exciting one. So give us a little flyover of what you and your partner are doing.
Sure. Kind of a 30,000 foot view is on one side of the equation for the practice. I work typically with companies that are 1 to 99 employees. I help them manage their risk, give them practical HR advice. I'm based here in downtown San Diego. My business partner is actually located back in Wisconsin. She actually is a CPA and has a master's in tax, so she kind of runs the day-to-day operations. On the other side of the coin, we do a lot of employment background checks, and those are typically for companies that are 1 to 10,000 plus employees. And so we're doing that on a daily basis and working with clients, and we focus on various industries, but we have a nice palette of clients. We haven't seen remarkably. We have not, and we're very fortunate in that respect, but we haven't seen that much of a downturn in our business as a result of just the incredible unemployment numbers that are coming out from the Department of Labor. Industries that we work in are the pharma, biotech. Obviously, these non-touch type industries are doing very well. Unfortunately, the high-touch industries are not doing so well. And but those are the two areas that we focus on. And I try to, in the HR practice side, I really try to be, my lens is more of an evidence-based management lens rather than quote unquote, best practices, which I think isn't, in my view, is just an overused term a lot. But just kind of relying and going back on my studies in the doctoral program, I try to view things through an evidence-based lens, and in order to help small businesses try to achieve and answer some of their HR questions.
That's fantastic. So great to hear you describe it. You also do workplace investigations, don't you, Pat?
I do. Obviously, not too many of those anymore. I've been in business for, it'll be 29 years in July, so. Not too much of those anymore, but yes, I've handled my fair share of discrimination and sexual harassment cases in the workplace for clients. Yes.
Yeah, I got a quick question. So you said no touch and high touch, just for vocabulary clarification for our listeners. Can you explain those, kind of give us a good definition? And then I know that our listeners are just chomping at the bit to know that they're still hiring out there. And so maybe talk just briefly before we get started on your industries that you're currently working with, why you think your business isn't off, where you are seeing some hiring. And we can get into that a little bit in the show, but I know immediately when you said, biotech and pharma and, they're, oh my gosh, are they hiring in those industries? So just a quick, let's just answer that burning question
Sure.
that I know came up for people.
And you're absolutely correct. They are hiring in those industries from a no-touch standpoint, meaning that there's not a lot of customer-client interaction, something that you would find, let's say, in a salon business or an esthetician or a spa. That's a high-touch industry, whereas the pharma, the biotech, the scientific, the investment industry, the construction industry, those are really no-touch industries. That are actually, they're hiring. There is hiring going on out there. Unfortunately, the cascading effect of unemployment has really hit hard the areas of the high touch industry, that being the retail sector, the restaurant sector, events, event planning, meetings, and events. And, I was so looking forward to the SHRM conference, the Society of Human Resources Management, have a conference every year.
Yep.
And I was so looking forward to it because it's right in my backyard.
Well, that's the Coachella of human resources and all those festivals and expos, and those are gone for a little while, I think. But it's interesting, just so the listeners know, Joel asked me in the opening a little bit about, how my business is. And I said, well, I'm seeing some hiring and I'm seeing some layoffs and furloughs. And what you just described in terms of industry and, sector rotation, sector momentum, that I'm seeing the exact same activity in the exact same sector. So I'm right there with you.
That's good. That's good to know.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's pretty clear that this is driven by sector. And Patrick, because you deal with pharma and biotech, you're going to see a lot of activity and, as you say, even hiring, and certainly a lot of other of the kind of HR activity that you do professionally, which we're so excited to hear about. But there's a whole world of other industries out there where it's kind of the opposite. And not only is there no hiring going on, but, businesses are permanently closing, laying people off. And I know you kind of wanted to speak a little bit today, and we wanted to ask you about your view of the job world, because we have we're going to have a 25% unemployment rate. At least that's going to be the peak, probably reported coming up next month. We have a tremendous amount of industries and types of businesses and sectors of work that are not only closing temporarily, but in many cases may not open again. And we have also some very large corporate conglomerates at a retail level that are also closing. So I wonder if you could, talk to Julie and I a little bit about what your view is of what's happening in that context.
That's a lot to unpack there. I think the answer.
Take it one suitcase at a time, Pat. Julie and I we'll let you open one bag at a time.
You got it.
We're taking notes.
You got it. I think that. In my view, in my perspective, clearly, the airline industry, the transportation industry, manufacturing, but manufacturing to a lesser extent, the industries that are really adversely affected. And you're right, Joel, that the numbers, national numbers for unemployment right now at 14.7. Of course, that's a lagging indicator, and so we'll have to wait and see what happens with the May unemployment numbers. Here in California, prior to the virus, unemployment was around 3.2 in San Diego, and there's some projections that it could be actually over the national average. National average is their projection. Department of Labor beige book that comes out. They're talking about anywhere, a mid 20% unemployment. Could be, I think it's going to be higher actually here in California, simply because the gig economy is very strong out here in California.
It is.
When I first arrived in California in 1999, I was truly amazed on the number of independent contractors, and I often reflected on the fact that it seemed to be more 1099s in the state than W-2s, and looking at that from the HR perspective. And so, it's adversely impacted from the Uber drivers and the conventions, the large gatherings, organizations, and whether it be in Las Vegas or San Diego for Comic-Con, and where we go from here is, I think, is that operative word that people are using to probably be the word of 2020. It's really the pivot, and how do these companies pivot into a a functional and financially sustainable company. And I certainly wouldn't pretend to be able to know how they're going to do that. I think having remote status workers can certainly fill those gaps. And I think that, the remote status worker that used to be whereby if you were teleworking, it used to be such a stigmatization of teleworking, either as an employee, you didn't want to feel like you were kind of slacking off as an employee, saying, "Hey, I want to telework, 2 to 3 days a week." That may not put you in the best light with your immediate supervisor. But now I think that stigmatization is just completely gone. I think it's gone, and these co-working spaces that are around the country where you all get together and you sit at a table and you have bounce different ideas off each other of these startup companies. I think that's dramatically changed, and the remote status worker is going to be more in vogue. It's going to be okay to work from your home. It's going to be okay not to have an office. But there are certain things that employers have to do in order to manage that remote workforce.
You want to tell us a little bit about that, Pat? Because I know you have some expertise in the question of both bringing on remote workers and rehiring or re-engaging remote workers who may have been laid off.
The way that I look at remote workers is if you look at a large organization, let's say international or multinational company, and how they send people overseas. They send them out on international assignments, and the expatriates out there, typically international assignments are 12 to 18 months. And they're there working on location in the company's foreign office, and they come back to the United States. And unfortunately, typically what happens is when these international assignees come back, the immediate supervisor says, "So where you been? Where you been the last 12 or 18 months?" And I'm kidding, of course, but what they lack, what they don't do is they don't download all that information to the immediate supervisor. They haven't communicated, and they haven't organized their thoughts. So, if you're going to have a remote status worker, my recommendation is really set your expectations, communicate, over communicate. You really can't under communicate, especially with Gen Y, the millennial generation. I use the example all the time that I'm a Gen Xer, and if I said something to a Gen Y subordinate and I said I wanted that by the end of the day, they might think the end of the day for them is 10 p.m. while I'm in bed. So you have to make sure that you're specific. So I would recommend, obviously, set the expectations, over communicate, and really try to not micromanage it. Really try not to micromanage them, but have that workflow. If you're going to put somebody out on a remote status, while this is all playing out, we don't know how long it's going to go. That's not my area of expertise. My area is really, human resources, employment background checks, and trying to make sure that clients hire the right people. We manage their risk. And I think there is some risk with remote workers because they're not on site, and you can't manage them in a way that you've been accustomed to. So I keep those three things in mind. Set the expectations, over communicate, and resist the whole micromanagement.
Yeah, Patrick Julie, as you know, is really America's career counselor, and is really at the sort of the tip of the spirit going on and working with young adults, particularly who are entering, re-entering, changing in the workforce. And Julie, are there some things you'd like to ask Pat, because he seems to be well located to perhaps give input?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that really helps me see the management's perspective on what they need to do to keep controls on the information from the remote worker. And, younger workers don't necessarily always see the intrinsic value of the work that they're doing in the context of the whole business or the whole industry or the whole economic movement that company is following. So until we get further in our careers, we don't really always see the whole picture. So I always try to illuminate that whole path for my clients, especially the younger ones, just establishing the first 5 to 7 years, 2, 5, 7 years is, look, this is what your job is going to be, but this is the role in general across all industries. And this is why it happens. And this is how the company you're interviewing for is going to be utilizing the work that you do. And I try to really give meaning to it so that they have a broader perspective. And I think that, as employers are hiring these younger workers, especially if they're going to be remote, because that's just one more link of information, kind of link of connectedness missing. I would think, Pat, that there would be some good training opportunity at the onboarding of a new employee to say, look, this is what we expect of you and why. And here's a little bit more about not just your job, but what it means in the context of the company and the economic movement that we're trying to follow and capitalize upon.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that. I think that discussion through the onboarding process, this is really a social experiment, what's been happening. And obviously it's very tragic on one side, but the social experiment from an employment side, from an HR perspective, to me is fascinating in the sense that prior to COVID-19, I was tasked with writing a critically appraised topic in my doctoral studies. And the topic was regarding flexible working arrangements. Remote status and remote working was not really high on the list of the analysis through an evidence-based lens that I looked at. It wasn't really, and so I'm very interested to see how that plays out after and whether or not that has become something more important to that individual because it has a sense of security working remotely. But to your point, I think the onboarding process is critical in the fact after you've done the hiring process, after you've done the sourcing and the interviewing and the background check, and you're onboarding this person. The tables have switched simply because the employer has the leverage because unemployment at 33 million people that are not working now. When employment was so low, the candidate had the leverage. Now, in a matter of a couple of months, it's completely switched, and the employer has that leverage to the extent where they can be a little bit more discriminating, if you will, but through that onboarding process to be able to elicit how that person is going to fit, as we say in HR, it's always the fit, right? The best fit, how they're going to best fit into that remote status role. And, I think gone are the times when you would have when the leverage was on the candidate side, and I saw this a lot, and I think, Julie, you might be able to confirm this, that, you'd have a Gen Y or even now Gen Z that's coming up. They would sit in an interview, and I've had clients, and I would do an interview, and I'd record the interview, and that particular candidate might say, now this is 2 months ago, would say, tell me why I should work here. And
no, they did not get my interview prep.
Yeah. And so I would end up passing some of that information on to the client. The client would be completely offended because, hey, they should feel, they should want to work here. And this is a great company. And, how dare they? And I said, well, listen, it's now the tables have turned a little bit.
Right.
And so now the employer has that leverage, and they can, be a little bit more discriminating in the onboarding process to make sure that particular remote candidate, that person is going to fit that role the way that they want to. And that onboarding process.
It's Pat, it sounds like now remote working skills are a skill set themselves. And wouldn't you agree that over communication on the part of the manager should also be applied to the worker?
I totally agree. I think I don't think you can really ever over communicate unless you're obviously divulging the strategic initiatives for a company. But
right.
From immediate supervisor to subordinate, I don't think you can really ever over communicate. And the style of communication changes, based upon generational. And I don't want to fit everybody into a specific box, but I as a Gen Xer, I prefer email versus text, and I know. The millennial generation prefers text, and the Gen Z prefers Snapchat or Instagram. But
right.
It's certain things that you have to do in order to, in order to accommodate people, and I just remember just prior to everything happening with COVID-19 that it was, and Julie, I'm sure you can attest to this, that it was just very challenging to get the right candidate and not have them have two offers, and they're trying to compare and contrast and going forward on various roles. Now that dynamic has completely switched.
Yeah, it's bad. I would completely agree with you, Pat. I think a lot of times what happens is when the economy changes, the economy breathes in and out, and a lot of job seekers and workers themselves don't recognize that, sometimes jobs are on sale and sometimes jobs are hard to find, and there was a surplus of them a few months ago. So it wasn't really about ever having to sell yourself. The company had to sell themselves
That's right.
on the candidate. But
Yep.
people tend to forget to step back and kind of look at I always tell my clients, think like a historian, get in there and really do your investigation and look close up, but zoom out and take a look at what's happening in the economy to help you position yourself the right way and understand how much that company may or may not need you at this time and how valuable you are to them. And I think going forward, this is really interesting, Joel, because this is something that's going to shift the way I'm counseling just right here, just this conversation. So thank you, Pat. This is going to shift how I'm going to start working with my clients a little bit more on those remote communication skills. Over communicate, not with necessarily a lot of content to bury your manager and slow him or her down in receiving your message. But I always tell my clients, develop a career vocabulary so you can articulate your value succinctly and clearly. And you need to work on being able to say, instead, oh, I do everything, or oh, I wear many hats. Describe it, be descriptive, and have those vocabulary words ready to go so that you can be responsive to your manager and make him or her look good, because they have a lot of management to do now. And that's then the next kind of question I wanted to ask you, Pat, is, I work with people all over, every age from roughly 25 all the way through 55, roughly, and in virtually every industry. So I have a real broad, and I know Joel has quite the breadth as well. But, there are some people who really, to be perfectly honest with you, have no preference for the work that they're doing as long as they're managing. They just have good management skills. You give them any project, they can get it done. It doesn't care. You could be baking cookies. You could be putting together a barbecue. You could be selling technology. It just, if you need something deployed, they're excellent at getting it deployed. Just tell them what their resources and assets are, and they'll get it done. And I would think that person now probably could position themselves very, very strongly in just remote management, because there's probably going to be, if I were to make one prediction out of this conversation here, for kind of this future of work that we're going to be going into in the near term, is there's probably going to be a space in a company for a secondary manager who's just the task manager. That would be my guess.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think
not on content so much, but on the movement of that content, that progression of the projects.
Yeah, like a project manager for remote status workers. That's a very good point.
That's true.
Yes.
Very true. Well, Pat, I wanted to jump in. I know we've had you a while already, but we don't want to let you go, so you just better sit tight. From my perspective, I work with a lot of small, to mid-sized companies, and these owners and managers of these companies are very vexed right now, I think, about how to bring employees back on, whether to bring employees back on, regardless of the industry. Obviously, it's going to be much easier if the industry is no touch and all digital, but assuming a range of industries, what are some of the things you're thinking about how employers themselves and owners can maximizing or strategically work to re-engage a workforce and some of the challenges they're facing? Could you speak to that?
Okay. I think that, I would look at, if I was an employer, I would look at, seriously consider hiring people that have already worked at the company. And just because they've got a good, if there's a good, a positive separation, those are the people that you want to look at. Those are the people that would obviously know the practices and how things flow through the company. And there's not a lot of training, or if they have to really jump in and handle issues. So you might want to consider looking at those people first in order to right the ship, if you will. Most companies, unfortunately, are in a position where they're probably trying to shed some employees. I worry about. I worry about the fact that employers are going to use this as a pretext to say, you know what, I don't need as many employees, and even though some of these employees are very integral and key employees, but I certainly would look at the employees who have worked there, and then additionally, I think I would highly consider whether a staffing company can assist you, depending on the type of industry, or you can get a really, really great recruiter and do some recruiting specifically for the industry. But it really depends on how long term you want to go with this strategy, and so I think most companies are in the position, and I can't speak for everybody, obviously, but in my view, it seems like most companies are just, let me get through these next 6 months. Let me see where the bottom line is, and let me do it in a strategic way. And I just think that that's something that they would need to consider of looking at the previous employees, reaching out to recruiters that they've dealt with before or staffing companies that they've dealt with before to develop some sort of strategic plan for a 6-month period, just to right the ship and to see where that course is going to go.
Well, I'm glad to hear you give your input on that, Patrick, because I think you're very well versed. And so I'm hearing you say that in general, and this is what I thought you'd say, that it's going to be go slow attitude on the part of employers. They're going to be careful about how they reopen. And of course, reopening is a key word we're all talking about in all of our lives. Mm-hmm. Everybody listening to this podcast, and Julie and I and you as well, how we reopen our own lives as well as reopen businesses. And then I'm also hearing you say that, as we are aware, many employers are not going to take back on many of their employees, or some of them. And that, I think, is going to create a broader sense of dislocation for many employees who had worked with companies who, aren't asked back.
Yes, I would agree with that. I read something, it was anecdotal, of course. I didn't verify the evidence the underlying evidence that justified it, but the numbers suggest that 42% of the jobs are not going to come back in their original form. And so that's concerning to me. I mean, when you're looking at unemployment at 33 million people. So, people have to pivot. Employers have to pivot. Employers have to kind of take this wait and see attitude, but just kind of right the ship, have a strategy for 6 months, see where this plays out. I think we're kind of all on edge as to what might happen in the fall. I mean, I don't have any experience in obviously this scientific and vaccines and virology and all these other things, but I think from a human resources perspective, if you can go out there and either recruit, staff, talk to previous employees that you had a good separation with, try to bring them back on a remote status, you might be able to weather the storm that way.
That was great advice. And Patrick, I think a lot of job seekers and companies as well are curious as to whether they should be holding back or moving forward aggressively. And I would like to give my opinion on that and then hear both yours and Joel's. I believe we are a united country, and I think we should all be moving forward together as aggressively as possible in bad times. And I think that the tricks and the fun of, I think I'm going to buy this company, or I think I'm going to launch this new product, or go out and do something creative, or maybe, broaden the scope of a business, a current business model. Those days are over all of a sudden, just very quickly. And it's back to the rum line, if you will. And I think that if people all unify within their organizations or within their occupations or within their communities to keep things moving forward, and, go ahead and say, I'm telling my clients, send those applications in. And I think that with your advice to send them, maybe start to make those outreach phone calls back to prior employers where you did have a positive separation, still have some relationships. That's a wonderful piece of advice. I love that. Thank you for putting that out there. But I believe that America's very strong, and we had an incredibly strong workforce, and we do have a young, ready to work workforce right now, and people are hungry. And young adults need to, have families and have homes and build their lives, and so that's just there's a lot of vigor in that early 30s. That's a huge demographic in our workforce. So I believe the demographics, speaking, kind of evidence based, if you will, suggest that be more aggressive than less aggressive in your hiring or your job searching, and because we don't know. But I would say lean more towards yes, go, let's resurrect. So that's just my opinion. I'd be curious to hear from the two of you.
I would agree with you with respect to an employee or a candidate that they should be aggressive in trying to find a role that a position that they're going to excel in, and that they have a passion for, and that there's job satisfaction and engagement. I think we would all agree that all the evidence suggests that monetarily that is an important issue as to why people stay at a company, why they stay engaged. But it's really job satisfaction is the number one issue, that why people want to work for a company. Why do they want to work for an Apple or a Google? I would respectfully disagree on the employer side that the employer should. I do believe we're all unified. I believe that we have there's strength in numbers and moving forward with a unified voice. I would, however, just be circumspect from an employer perspective, simply because I think there's a lot of uncertainty there. And I know I have a client that has a skincare company, and they've pivoted and they have all their stuff online, and they're doing okay. They've obviously seen some downturn, but they had a very online business-based model. And when I was helping them write the handbook, there's some very generous benefits. And I said to the owner, I said, these are very generous. This is more than what I've seen in the past from such a nascent company. It's much easier to give things, and it's very difficult to take them away in the event of hard times. And so I'm always cautious with the clients to say, listen, I think maybe this can be more incremental, an incremental way to add benefits and value to the role instead of just being so open-handed. I think it's incredibly generous of her to do that. And, based upon the vacation days and the PTO and all the other perks that she was availing her 25 employee workforce. But, who knew that this obviously was going to happen to this extent, and the devastating impact on the economy, as well as the 33 million people that are unemployment. She's had to kind of roll back some of those perks. So I agree with you. I mean, unified, moving forward, but cautiously, I guess.
Interesting. Okay.
You two have really summed it up well. I mean, I could probably pontificate for about 20 minutes on this topic, but I won't,
right.
Because we don't have the time, number one. Before we let you go, Pat, I mean, Julie knows I have strong opinions, but at this point, I will revel in the input I've gotten from you both. Because Julie, I really think in terms of the employment seeker, you gave a great overview, and Patrick, of course, in terms of the companies. I think your advice was sanguine and well spoken. Earlier in this conversation, Patrick, you have a couple times have referred to evidence-based work and evidence-based research, and as opposed to best practices. I think it would be a good way to end if you could just explain, because maybe everyone doesn't really know what you mean by that, and I think that's a critical piece of information. So, would you just share what that is?
Sure. Well, as well as I do. I mean, you have a PhD, so
Right.
I would. I think when I speak of evidence-based management, I'm speaking of a systematic way to look at the evidence, to bring it into focus based upon scholarship, based upon methodology, in order to look at a particular topic that has to be critically appraised. We have critically appraised topics. We have, systematic reviews. We have dissertations, which obviously are more granular, and then we have rapid evidence assessments. So from an evidence-based management standpoint, there are a lot of definitions. And of course, one of the definitions by Denise Rousseau, who's a very famous management person, it's really the culmination of information, scholarship, peer-reviewed articles, and methodology that takes you in and tries to answer the research question. A best practices standpoint is more anecdotal, is more,
right.
And not to say that doesn't have a place it just doesn't have a place in my mind in a lot of respects, just because if I can't find the data, and if that data is not adequately supported and justified, it's difficult for me to get behind it. So when I see, and I use the term, and I don't mean it in a pejorative way, but if I use a management guru, the next guru du jour, somebody that's putting something out that says, okay, you need to fire your best employee. Really? Why? Stuff like that is just, I remember reading a book on some physical therapy issues, and I won't name the author, but it is a well-known doctor of physical therapy. And I was trying to help some of my aches and pains over the years from being a weightlifter. I was thumbing through it, and some of the stuff looked good. And he had this abstract, and it said that it's over 200,000 patients that he's dealt with. And I'm going through it. And of course, in my mind, I'm looking for citations, right? I'm looking for something that I can go back on. And so I'm flipping through it. I see nothing. Now, it's not to say that it wasn't good information. Some of it worked, but I don't know why it worked. And so when you're trying to put forth a management perspective through an evidence-based lens, you have to know why something worked, not just take a shot at it. And that's what happens in the companies, whether the small companies or mid-sized companies, that they watch something on CNBC, great program, some management guru comes on and says, here are the top 5 things in order to hire the best candidate you possibly can. But none of it is evidence-based management. It's something that they put together. Here are the top 5 things. And so they take that, they run with it, but where does it really get them? How do they hire the right people and manage their current risks? Because turnover is very expensive for any company, but especially a small one. And if you can reduce turnover in your hiring process and keep your employees happy and have that job satisfaction, you're going to go places.
Okay, Pat. Well, that was an incredibly valuable answer. Don't you think, Julie? I mean,
absolutely.
That really helped illuminate an important concept, because there's a lot of baloney running around. Have you noticed?
There is
baloney, and it's baloney masquerading as data, and baloney masquerading as facts. And so I wanted you to speak to it because I knew you would be eloquent, and you were.
You were.
And we don't. We have a PhD in eloquence on this show, Patrick, and you just got a second one today. How about that?
Thank you.
Given by Joel and Julie. It's evidence.
I appreciate it.
And that's one of the best PhDs you can get. We are going to have to wrap up, but gosh, Patrick, I know Julie and I both feel it's just been an incredible interview, and we're so grateful and happy to have had you. Now, I want to let everyone know, Patrick again works at Trust HR, and you can reach him directly, I think, at trusthr.com, and you can reach Patrick on LinkedIn if you want to connect with him. And we have lots of people who hear our podcast, and I think, Patrick, your comments and your interaction with Julie and with myself have really spoken for themselves today. It's been really a pleasure having you on the show.
Thanks for having me anytime. Always happy to discuss HR. And
I always did I hear anytime? Did you just say that?
I hear. I'm feeling a chapter 2.
Okay, me too.
Yeah, anytime. And I just want to leave you with this one last thought. The interaction and the engagement. Human resources. You can, even though a lot of people are going to remote statuses, we can't lose what that H stands for. We can't lose that human quality, that human element. And that's so important, especially in days like today, when we can't have that interaction that we've become accustomed to, and that we're relegated to Zoom calls or on the phone. So, HR is going to be even more important, in my view, going forward.
Wow. Well spoken. Okay. Well, all you employers out there, you know where to reach Patrick.
This was amazing, Patrick. You added so much value to our show today. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. Good. We'll see you soon. Take care. Hey, Julie. Well, I knew that inviting Patrick on the show would produce an interesting segment, but I didn't really know he would be that eloquent and that sophisticated in what he had to say, huh?
so vibrant and so many good and little angles in there for both employers and candidates alike to be considering as they move forward into this uncharted territory. He was really wonderful to have on. I got a lot of key takeaways there, and I know everybody who listened to this podcast today is thinking I got something good.
Yeah, I mean, I always love our guests, and they're always great. But when this guy was on, I felt like I was kind of looking up a little bit. He was very, very skilled, and obviously has a lot of great things to say, and has tremendous expertise in his area. I mean, all of our guests have expertise, and they're all wonderful to have on the show. But especially right now, in the middle of the pandemic, to hear a voice of such maturity and experience in this particular area, which is a key area for you, for me, and for all the folks that are listening to the podcast.
Absolutely. And in classic HR style, he had that, he carries himself with that measured, sophisticated, balanced, level-headed tone. And I know that can be a little bit maddening for some people, because some people are looking to hear that the world is falling apart or that the world is about to recover. And HR isn't going to give you that specific of an answer. But I do want everybody to recognize that he did really give a message of hope there at the end. And it was woven throughout in his vocabulary choice. He really does believe, it seems to me, that moving forward is the next wave, and that there are keys to doing it well. And I think he did a great job of outlining what those are.
Yeah, you're right, kiddo. And you know what else that you just pointed out, which is really interesting? It was thick. It was complex. The material he was presenting was very sophisticated, and it required you to what? To actually listen,
right.
Concentrate, to focus, to think about what the speaker was saying. And from my book, those aren't bad things.
Right. And these are important times. If you're ever going to be paying attention to career management, this is the time to be doing it.
God, Julie, you always have the right phrase, paying attention. What a wonderful phrase to describe what people need to do during the interview with Pat when they hear it on this podcast. So if you're just at the end and you kind of skip through it, guess what? We want you to go back to the beginning of the podcast. We want you to follow America's Career Counselor's instruction, and we want you to pay attention.
Pay attention. And Joel, didn't you love his description of evidence-based? I mean, I think you and I, both coming from an academic background, practice in that very same vein, where we follow theory, we follow, researchers ahead of us who took something and made something interesting and measurable, and there are peer-reviewed publications that describe the norm of human behavior given a certain set of circumstances within a certain environment. And that frame is workable for each client based on evidence that you and I have both studied in our respective fields, your psychology, mine career psychology. And I just want to point that out to our listeners as well. Evidence-based practice is something Joel and I both very much agree on. It's the difference between a career coach and a career counselor, to be honest with you. No disrespect to career coaches, but there is a certain level of training and rigor to be able to meet the standards from the National Career Development Association. Joel has a PhD in psychology. I mean, the research is what drives the practice, and it sounds like the same is absolutely this true for Patrick and what he's doing. And I just really, really respect and appreciate and enjoy that professional alignment.
Hey, you know me, Julie. When have I ever given up 2 minutes of a chance to pontificate on air? I never do that. But in this case, I specifically wanted to stop and ask Patrick about evidence-based HR and just evidence-based research in general, because I do think that people don't get that, and people have become, so conditioned into a very fast pace. The devil may care. Anything, any kind of baloney passes for a fact. And I feel like Patrick was really the right person to address that. And I think he addressed it so fully. It was kind of like hard to, if you were paying attention and following your instructions, Julie, it was kind of hard not to agree with him at the end.
Well, he's got the facts, right, Joel?
We had a lot of fun today, didn't we?
Oh, it was great. He was great. What a great guest, Joel. Thank you. That was really enlightening.
Well, we had a little break, during the pandemic, and I thought we wanted to come back with somebody really interesting and somebody really who could sort of deliver the bacon and really make us all stop and think about the things that he was talking about. And I think that guest did that. And now we're raring to go with lots of callers and lots of issues. And remember, we want to tell everybody who are listeners and fans of the podcast, we're going to be talking pivot. Folks,
Right.
We're going to be talking pivot today because that's the name of the game coming forward. Whether you're 23, 33, or 63, it's called pivot. And Julie and I are going to be talking about that because, who better than America's career counselor to tell you how to pivot? By the way, have all of our listeners, have you ever seen Julie pivot? Well, I have. And she does a pivot like nobody's business. That's all I can say.
Only because my staircase is split in the middle and I have to.
There we go. Hey, well, listen, we'll look forward to hearing from you, Julie, and taking callers and coming back on the air. We'll see you all real soon. Take care, everybody.
If you'd like to be a caller on Career Lab, please don't be shy. We'd love to hear from you. Give us a ring, send us an email, go to www.careerlabnow.com. Find a way to reach out to us. It's really easy. We'd love to have you on the show.